All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are going deep, deep, deep inside DNA.
That's right, a real deep dive.
We're going to crack the code of DNA's structure, replication, even how it's organized.
Into those little bundles we call chromosomes?
Exactly. And you know what's crazy? We're not just talking textbook stuff here.
Oh, no.
This is the basis for, like, everything. Heredity, traits getting passed down, even things like aging.
And cancer.
Oh, yeah, it all comes back to DNA.
And get this, a single human cell copies 6 billion nucleotide pairs in just a few hours. It's incredible.
6 billion. That's nuts. Okay, but hold on a sec. Back up.
Okay.
Imagine those early scientists, right? They're in the lab, puzzling over this mysterious molecule.
Right, the molecule of inheritance.
It had to be something pretty important to carry all that genetic information. But
Yeah.
was it protein? Was it DNA? What was it?
Oh, it was a real head scratcher for a while.
Yeah.
Proteins, I mean, they're complex. They do all sorts of things in the cell.
These seemed like a good bet.
They did.
But then a few really cool studies came along,
A few groundbreaking studies shifted the focus to DNA.
like Frederick Griffith
Griffith.
and his pneumonia-causing bacteria.
Yeah.
He had these 2 strains, one harmless and one, well, not so harmless.
The pathogenic one.
Right, and get this, he killed the bad bacteria, mixed their remains with the harmless ones, and suddenly,
Some of the harmless bacteria transformed. They became pathogenic.
like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It really was a surprising finding. That discovery of bacterial transformation really pointed to this transforming principle.
A transforming principle.
Yes, this mysterious substance that could carry genetic information from one bacterium to another.
Okay, that makes sense. But they still didn't know for sure if this transforming principle was DNA or protein.
Right.
Oh, you know, bacteria are complicated little things.
So how did they nail down DNA as the culprit?
Exactly.
Well, Hershey and Chase?
Hershey and Chase, yeah.
They used bacteriophages.
What are those?
They're these tiny viruses made of basically just protein and DNA, and they inject their genetic material into bacteria.
Oh, sneaky.
Right, so they cleverly used radioactive label
Ooh, radioactive label.
to track whether it was the protein or the DNA that got into the bacteria.
So what happened? What got in?
The DNA, it was the DNA calling the shots. This was big,
Wow, case closed. DNA was the carrier of genetic information.
not protein.
So, okay, DNA is looking like the star of the show, but what about its structure?
Wait, how is all this genetic information organized?
Got to be organized somehow.
Well, Erwin Chargaff,
Chargaff, okay.
he analyzed DNA composition very meticulously, and he found that the amounts of the bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, they differed between species.
So the amounts of A, T, G, and C were different in different species. Interesting.
Right. This was a huge clue that DNA could actually hold all the diverse genetic information needed for all these different organisms.
No, that makes sense.
But there's more.
There's more.
He also discovered this mind-boggling pattern.
A pattern.
He found that the amount of adenine always equaled the amount of thymine, and the amount of guanine always equaled the amount of cytosine, regardless of the species.
Oh, wow. So like A equals T and G equals C no matter what.
Precisely.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So that's Chargaff's rules.
Exactly.
It's like a secret code within the code. But what did it all mean?
Well, think of it this way. Those rules were hinting at an underlying structure, a pairing between specific bases.
Okay, I'm seeing it.
But the actual shape, the three-dimensional structure, that remained a mystery.
Until Watson and Crick
Ah, yes. Watson and Crick.
enter the double helix. And of course, we can't forget Rosalind Franklin and her incredible X-ray diffraction work.
Right. Those X-ray images were crucial. They revealed the helical shape of DNA, suggesting it was 2 strands, not just one.
Like a spiral staircase, but we couldn't see the steps yet.
Exactly.
So Watson and Crick took those images, those shadows, combined them with Chargaff's rules, and boom,
The double helix model.
2 anti-parallel sugar phosphate chains winding around each other.
With the bases paired in the middle, like rungs on a ladder.
A twisted ladder
Yeah.
with AT and GC pairs holding it all together. It's beautiful.
It is a beautiful structure. And it finally revealed how DNA could carry and replicate all that genetic information.
Mind-blowing stuff.
It really is. In fact, Watson and Crick themselves wrote in their paper, "It has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material."
They knew they were onto something big.
They did.
But how does that copying actually work?
How does one DNA molecule magically become 2 identical copies?
That's what we're going to find out next. All right, so we've got this elegant double helix, this twisted ladder, but how does it actually replicate? How does it make copies of itself? It's not like our cells have tiny little Xerox machines inside, right?
No, definitely not tiny Xerox machines. DNA replication, it's like a carefully choreographed dance with enzymes and proteins all working together.
It's a pretty complex process.
It is, with incredible precision. We're talking about a human cell copying 6 billion base pairs in just a few hours.
6 billion. Wow.
And with only about 1 error per 10 billion nucleotides.
That's amazing.
It is. Think of it like transcribing 1,400 biology textbooks with almost no typos.
That's a lot of textbooks and a lot of accuracy.
It really highlights the remarkable fidelity of DNA replication.
Okay, so where does this replication party even begin? Is there a designated spot on the DNA molecule?
Absolutely. It all starts at specific locations called origins of replication.
Origins of replication, okay.
Think of them as short, recognizable sequences in the DNA.
Like a starting line.
Exactly. Now, bacteria, like E. coli, with their simple circular chromosomes, they just have one origin of replication.
Okay, one origin makes sense.
But eukaryotic cells, like ours, well, things get a bit more complex.
Eukaryotic cells, remind me what those are again.
Right, good point. Eukaryotic cells, they're the building blocks of more complex organisms, like plants and animals.
Okay, got it.
And their DNA, it's much longer, organized into multiple chromosomes.
So they need multiple origins of replication.
Exactly. It's like having multiple construction crews working on different sections of a huge building.
Makes sense. Much more efficient that way.
Right. But how does the DNA actually unwind and separate? I mean, those two strands are so tightly intertwined.
Yeah, it's like they'd be glued together.
It's remarkable, isn't it? But that's where an enzyme called helicase comes in.
Helicase, okay.
Think of it as a molecular zipper unzipping the double helix at those Y-shaped regions called replication forks.
I'm picturing tiny little helicases zipping along the DNA, splitting those strands apart.
I like that image. But wouldn't those separated strands just want to stick right back together?
Probably, yeah.
They would. That's why we have single-strand binding proteins.
What do?
They jump in and hold those separated strands apart, preventing them from repairing.
So they're like little chaperones, keeping the strands separated.
Exactly. They provide a nice, stable template for the next steps.
Okay, so we've got the stage set, separated strands held apart like the two halves of a zipper. But how does this cell actually build new strands based on this template?
Now it's time for the stars of the show. DNA polymerases.
DNA polymerase.
These enzymes are the master builders responsible for synthesizing new DNA strands by adding nucleotides one by one.
So they're like molecular bricklayers, carefully following the blueprint and adding the matching bricks to build the new strand.
A great analogy. But they can't just start building from scratch.
Yeah, they need something to get them going.
Exactly. They need a primer.
A primer.
It's a short stretch of RNA synthesized by an enzyme called primase.
RNase.
And this primer, it provides the necessary anchor for DNA polymerase to latch onto and start adding DNA nucleotides.
So the primer is like laying the foundation for the new DNA strand.
Precisely. But remember, DNA strands have directionality, meaning they have a specific orientation.
Right, we talked about that.
And DNA polymerase, it's a bit picky. It can only add nucleotides to the 3' end of a growing DNA strand, never to the 5' end.
Like a one-way street.
Exactly. The construction crew can only work in one direction.
Okay, I'm following so far. But if the two strands in the double helix run in opposite directions, how can they both be synthesized in the same direction?
Great question. And that's where we get into the concept of leading and lagging strands.
Leading and lagging strands, what are those?
So on one template strand, DNA polymerase can just cruise along with the replication fork, synthesizing the new strand continuously.
Smooth sailing.
Exactly. That's our leading strand.
Okay, but what about the other strand, the one that's going against the flow?
That's our lagging strand, and it's a bit more complicated.
Oh.
Because it runs in the opposite direction, DNA polymerase has to work in short bursts, synthesizing the new strand in fragments.
Fragments.
Yes, and these fragments are called Okazaki fragments.
Okazaki fragments, okay.
And they're also synthesized in the 5' to 3' direction, but moving away from the replication fork.
So it's like building the lagging strand in reverse, in little chunks that are later stitched together.
Exactly. Each Okazaki fragment needs its own primer to get started, and DNA polymerase keeps churning out these fragments as the replication fork opens up.
So it's a lot of starting and stopping.
It is. But then another enzyme, DNA ligase, comes in.
What does ligase do?
It acts like molecular glue, joining those Okazaki fragments together to create a continuous lagging strand.
So we have helicases unzipping, single-strand binding proteins holding things steady, primases laying down the foundation, DNA polymerase building the new strands, and ligase stitching it all together.
It's quite the coordinated effort.
It really is. But with all this activity, are there ever any mistakes? I mean, no construction crew is perfect, right?
You're right, even the best crews make mistakes, but DNA replication has an impressive quality control system.
Oh,
DNA polymerases aren't perfect, but they have this built-in proofreading ability to catch any mismatched nucleotides.
so they can correct errors as they go.
Exactly, and if they miss something, the cell has backup mechanisms like mismatch repair.
Mismatch repair.
Specialized enzymes come in and fix any errors that slip through.
Like a double check system.
Exactly, so the genetic information is copied with incredible fidelity.
Wow, that's amazing. But what about the very ends of those long, linear DNA molecules? Don't we lose a bit of information from the ends each time they're copied?
Ah, that's a great question. And it brings us to the fascinating world of telomeres.
Telomeres. Those are like those protective caps on shoelaces, right?
That's a fantastic analogy. They're like those caps, but for our chromosomes. They protect those vulnerable ends.
They are. It's a great analogy. So telomeres, they protect those vulnerable ends of our chromosomes, but how do they actually work?
So telomeres, they're special repetitive DNA sequences, and they're found at the very ends of chromosomes.
Like a buffer zone.
Exactly. They act as buffers, so they prevent the loss of those important genes during replication.
So they're like sacrificial DNA sequences that can be worn down without actually harming the important genes. That's pretty clever.
It is. They take the hit so the valuable information stays protected. But telomeres, they do more than just act as buffers.
They do.
Yeah, they help prevent the cell from mistaking the natural ends of chromosomes for damaged DNA.
Oh, that makes sense. Broken DNA ends, those can cause all sorts of problems, right?
Big problems. A broken DNA end, that's a signal that something's gone wrong. It can lead to cell cycle arrest or even cell death.
So the telomeres are like waving a flag saying, hey, everything's cool here. It's just the natural end of the chromosome. No need to panic.
Exactly. They help maintain the integrity of our chromosomes and prevent unnecessary cellular freakouts.
Okay, that makes sense. But I've also heard telomeres linked to aging. How does that fit in?
It's fascinating. In most of our somatic cells, the cells that make up our body tissues, telomeres, they actually shorten a bit with each round of DNA replication.
So every time the DNA replicates, the telomeres get a little shorter.
Right, and this shortening, it's thought to contribute to the aging process of those cells.
Like a tiny internal clock ticking away.
A good way to think about it. It could be a factor in the aging of the organism as a whole, too.
Wow, so our telomeres could be counting down the time until our cells can no longer divide.
It's an area of active research, very intriguing, but there's another twist.
A twist. What is it?
There's an enzyme called telomerase,
Telomerase, okay.
and it can actually lengthen telomeres.
Wait, so it can rewind the clock on our chromosomes?
It can. Telomerase is especially active in germ cells, the cells that give rise to sperm and eggs.
Ah, that makes sense. So the chromosomes passed down to the next generation have a full set of telomeres.
Exactly, preserving that genetic information across generations.
So telomerase is like a cellular fountain of youth for our chromosomes.
It really is. But there's a catch.
There's always a catch.
While telomerase is crucial for maintaining telomere length in those germ cells and certain stem cells,
Okay.
it's tightly regulated in most other cells. And for a good reason.
Why is that?
Well, think about cancer.
Cancer, okay.
One of the hallmarks of cancer is uncontrolled cell division, right? If telomerase was super active in all our cells, well, cells could divide indefinitely.
That's a problem.
It is, potentially leading to tumor formation.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly. Too little telomerase activity and our cells age. Too much. And we risk uncontrolled cell growth.
It's like a Goldilocks situation. We need just the right amount of telomerase activity.
Scientists are actually exploring ways to manipulate telomerase activity. It could have potential for anti-aging therapies and even cancer treatments.
It's incredible to think that these tiny little stretches of DNA at the ends of our chromosomes play such huge roles in aging, cell division, even cancer development.
It really highlights the interconnectedness of all these processes happening inside our cells. DNA, it's not just a static blueprint, it's dynamic, it's constantly at work, it's orchestrating life itself.
That's a great way to put it. Well, we've journeyed from the double helix to the dance of replication, and we even explored those mysterious telomeres. And I think it's safe to say DNA is pretty amazing.
It really is a remarkable molecule.
If you're feeling inspired after this deep dive, I encourage you to keep exploring. The world of DNA is vast and full of incredible secrets waiting to be uncovered. Who knows what we'll discover next?